The son-in-law was so large that his daughter complained of pain every time. Eleanor, even when I try to be careful, I can't do anything about it. Dmitri, no, Daniel, admitted in a trembling voice. Eleanor took a deep breath and finally made a decision. Dan, would you let me take a look myself? At that moment, Daniel jumped up from his seat. Eleanor, what are you saying? But Eleanor took a step toward him and whispered, This is for Sophie's sake. Trust me. And so, before her mother-in-law's eyes, the truth was revealed. Was such a size even possible for an ordinary man? Along with her surprise, feminine instincts that had lain dormant for 6 years stirred within her. In the end, the two opened a door to a world of the unknown, a door that could no longer be closed. Deep night, 12 o'clock. A heavy silence hung in the young couple's bedroom. 26-year-old Sophia Bennett sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched tightly. 6 months had passed since the wedding, but this time of day still filled her with dread. When the sound of water from the shower stopped, Sophia's shoulders trembled almost imperceptibly. 29-year-old Daniel Mitchell emerged, drying his hair with a towel. Seeing his wife's tense posture, his expression darkened. Sophie, if you're tired tonight, you can just go to sleep, Daniel said cautiously. But Sophia shook her head. It's okay, Dan. Daniel sat beside his wife and gently put his arm around her shoulders. He felt Sophia's body tense up instantly and slowed his movements even more. I won't force anything, just relax. But when Daniel's clothes fell to the floor and his body was revealed, Sophia's face went pale. How is this even possible? She murmured softly. Every time she saw Daniel's formidable size, she felt helpless. I'm sorry, Sophie. I can't help it, Daniel said, guilt written all over his face. No, it's me. I need to get used to it. Sophia tried to smile, but inside, fear was tightening its grip. Daniel approached his wife with the utmost care. I'll go very slowly. If it hurts, tell me right away. Sophia nodded, but her body had already turned to stone from tension. Daniel began to undress her tenderly. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself for the pain to come. A long time passed. In the quiet bedroom, soft sounds occasionally escaped, but they were sounds not of pleasure, but of pain. The night wore on. As the clock hands neared midnight, silence once again fell over the room. Sophia rose from the bed on unsteady legs. I'm going to the bathroom. Her voice was thinner than usual and trembling. Daniel's heart clenched when he saw the state his wife was in. The way Sophia walked made it clear she was far from all right. When the bathroom door closed, Daniel stared at the ceiling and let out a heavy sigh. In the bathroom, Sophia looked at her reflection. The mirror showed a pale face and moist eyes. How much longer will this go on? She whispered softly as she splashed cold water on her face. She took a painkiller from the cabinet and swallowed it. She couldn't fall asleep without the medication anymore. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Daniel was tormented by guilt. Because of his natural endowment, his beloved wife was suffering so much. He had searched for various solutions online, but there was no fundamental remedy. What am I going to do? Daniel muttered. Suggest seeing a doctor? Sophie would be too embarrassed, but he couldn't let the situation continue like this any longer. Sophia returned from the bathroom and lay down. Go to sleep, Dan. Sophie, I'm really so sorry. I said it's okay. But Sophia's voice was laced with immense exhaustion. That night, they fell asleep with their backs to each other. Between them lay a problem they couldn't solve, despite their love. The next morning, Sophia sat at her vanity, applying heavy makeup. She was trying to hide her pallor and the dark circles under her eyes. She dreaded the thought of answering her colleagues' questions about the blissful life of newlyweds. Daniel also went to work with a heavy heart. The image of his suffering wife kept appearing before his eyes. During his lunch break, a colleague approached him. Dan, you're a newlywed. Why do you look so gloomy? Oh, just a bit tired. Daniel forced a smile, but his heart was heavy. Who could he confide in about such a problem? That evening at home, they had dinner together again in an awkward atmosphere. They loved each other, but they could feel themselves drifting apart. Sophia thought to herself, if only I could tell someone about this, it might feel better. But who would understand such a delicate topic? Days passed, and the situation didn't improve. Sophia's pain only grew worse. A week later, on Saturday afternoon, Sophia went to visit her mother, 62-year-old Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor had been living alone for 6 years since her husband's death. The moment her daughter entered the hallway, Eleanor sensed something was wrong. Normally, Sophia would greet her with a bright, cheerful voice, but today she only gave a lifeless nod. "Come in, Sophie, dear," Eleanor said warmly, but her daughter's face remained dull. Eleanor noticed that her daughter walked more cautiously and slowly than usual. What particularly caught her eye was how Sophia, grimacing slightly, sat down on the sofa with exaggerated care. Having raised her daughter for nearly 30 years, Eleanor was highly observant and missed nothing. While making tea, Eleanor continued to watch her daughter. Normally, Sophia would have come to the kitchen to help, but today she sat motionless, staring out the window. "Sophie, you look exhausted. Has something happened?" Eleanor asked carefully as she set the cup down on the table. Sophia's shoulders tensed. "No, Mom, it's just work." But there was no life in her voice. Eleanor immediately knew her daughter was lying. She knew all of Sophia's habits. When she lied, she would look away, fidget with her fingers, and speak more softly. "Sophie, don't lie to me. Are you in pain?" At her mother's warm but firm tone, Sophia's eyes filled with tears. The emotions she had been holding back were ready to burst forth. Eleanor sat beside her daughter and gently put an arm around her shoulders. Feeling her mother's warmth, Sophia finally spoke. "Mom, it's so embarrassing." Listening to her daughter's trembling voice, Eleanor waited patiently. She had an idea of what was coming, but she wanted Sophia to say it herself. After a long pause, Sophia lowered her head and said, "Dan, he's too big. It hurts so much every time. I can't stand it." Eleanor's eyes widened. At first, she didn't fully understand what her daughter meant, but soon the situation became clear. She was a woman too, and she remembered her youth. But somewhere deep inside, a strange feeling began to stir. The curiosity of a woman who had lived alone for 6 years, having forgotten male attention. "Oh, so that's the problem." Eleanor's face flushed slightly, but seeing her daughter's suffering, this was no time to be shy. "So that's why you've been so uncomfortable? Have you seen a doctor?" "How could I go to a doctor with something like this? I'm too ashamed." Sophia shook her head. Eleanor hugged her daughter tightly and stroked her back. "It'll be okay, Sophie. Mom will figure something out." But Eleanor herself didn't know what solution there could be. Yet, strangely, curiosity about her son-in-law Daniel began to grow within her. Just how big is he? The question wouldn't leave her mind. A few days later, Eleanor called her son-in-law. "Dan, if you have time, come by my place." Daniel's voice sounded anxious. "Eleanor, did I do something wrong?" "No, I need to talk to you about Sophie. It's important, so please come." The serious tone of his mother-in-law made Daniel nervous. He suspected his wife might have told her mother about their problem. The following evening, Daniel stood outside Eleanor's apartment door for a long time. Several times he raised his hand to the doorbell and lowered it again, unable to press it. "Come in, Dan." Eleanor opened the door. She looked more serious than usual. Today she was wearing an elegant beige blouse and a black skirt, and a subtle fragrance of perfume lingered in the air. Daniel sat in the living room, his hands on his knees, staring at the floor. Seeing her son-in-law, Eleanor could tell he was suffering too. "Dan, I've heard about Sophie's problem." Daniel flinched. "Eleanor." His voice trembled. "It's okay, but Sophie is struggling a lot." Daniel lowered his head. "I'm sorry. I try to be careful, but I can't do anything about it." Eleanor looked at her son-in-law for a moment, then asked cautiously, "Have you tried other methods?" "I've read things online. I suggested seeing a doctor, but Sophie is too embarrassed." Daniel's eyes showed genuine concern. Seeing this, Eleanor made a bold decision. "Dan, maybe I could take a look and see how things are?" "Eleanor, what are you saying?" Daniel tried to stand up, startled, but Eleanor stopped him with a gesture. "I know a woman's body better. I can figure out how to make it less painful for Sophie." Eleanor moved closer, and Daniel shrank back against the edge of the sofa. "This isn't right," he said, his voice shaking, but under Eleanor's insistent gaze, he couldn't firmly refuse. "Is this really just for Sophie's sake?" "Of course," Eleanor nodded. "What other reason would there be?" But in her heart, other feelings were already stirring. Daniel hesitated for a long time, but finally nodded. "If it really helps Sophie." Eleanor's gaze shifted. "Yes, this is for Sophie." Eleanor sat down next to Daniel and placed her hand on his shoulder. The warm scent of her body reached his nose, and Daniel flinched almost imperceptibly. This will be our secret, just between us, she whispered, her breath brushing against his neck. Daniel's heart began to race. Eleanor's touches grew bolder. As she unbuttoned his shirt, she murmured, "You have a wonderful body." Daniel was confused, but strangely, he found it pleasant. Eleanor, that's enough." But her hands didn't stop. "This is for Sophie," Eleanor repeated, and Daniel could no longer resist. "But this is too much," he tried to protest, but his body was responding differently. In the end, he pulled Eleanor into his arms. "Dan, calm down," she said, but he was already in the grip of his instincts. Once in the bedroom, they could no longer stop. Apologies and doubts gave way to passion. In the end, they plunged into the depths of forbidden pleasure. In the quiet bedroom, only heavy breathing could be heard, and the setting sun illuminated their entwined bodies. When it was over, Daniel, breathing heavily, stared at the ceiling. "Eleanor, what have I done?" Reason returned, and guilt washed over him. Eleanor, too, was overwhelmed with complicated feelings. "We've made a terrible mistake." Daniel grabbed his head. "If Sophie finds out, what then?" Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't just your fault. I'm equally to blame." But they both understood that what had happened could not be called normal. Daniel went home, tormented by remorse. Yet the vivid sensations he had just experienced still coursed through his body. Eleanor, left alone in her apartment, regretted what had happened, but she couldn't deny the feeling of fulfillment she had experienced for the first time in 6 years. That night, Daniel lay beside Sophia, who was already asleep, and couldn't close his eyes, staring at the ceiling. "I've lost my mind. To do something like that with my mother-in-law," he whispered quietly, but the memories stirred his blood. It was completely different from the cautious relations he'd had over the past 6 months. Looking at his innocently sleeping wife, he felt like a traitor. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood before the mirror, examining her body. The places Daniel had touched seemed to still burn. Male warmth and rough breathing, things she hadn't experienced for 6 years, were vivid in her mind. "This must not happen again," Eleanor murmured, but her heart said otherwise. The desire to experience that moment once more had already taken root in her. The next morning, Daniel and Sophia had breakfast together. "Dan, did you stop by Mom's yesterday?" Sophia asked cheerfully. The spoon in Daniel's hand trembled. "Yes, I stopped by briefly," he replied, trying to stay calm. "What did you talk about?" "She's just worried about me." Daniel couldn't look into his wife's innocent eyes. Sophia didn't notice her husband's strange state. Daniel's voice grew quieter as guilt for his lie weighed on him. Images of Eleanor surfaced in his mind. That evening in bed, Daniel was even more cautious with Sophia. Because of what had happened with his mother-in-law, he felt immense guilt toward his wife. A week passed, but neither Daniel nor Eleanor could forget that day. Daniel couldn't focus at work, and Eleanor felt a growing loneliness. The female desire that had awakened after 6 years of slumber demanded satisfaction. She wanted to feel again the powerful sensations that Daniel had given her. Finally, Eleanor sent Daniel a message. "Dan, if you have time, come by. We need to discuss something about Sophie." Receiving the message, Daniel's heart began to pound. He knew what this discussion meant. "I can't go. This isn't right." He struggled with himself, but eventually he found himself heading to Eleanor's house. The pull was irresistible. When he arrived, he hesitated for a long time in front of the door, but eventually rang the bell. "Come in, Dan." Eleanor looked different. She had put on more makeup than usual and was wearing a beautiful dress. "Eleanor, what did you want to talk about?" "Sit down, have some tea." But tea was of no interest to either of them. An awkward silence filled the room, charged with mutual attraction. "Dan, how is Sophie doing after the last time?" Eleanor asked first. "She seems to be doing better," Daniel answered cautiously. "That's good." "So I helped." Eleanor's voice carried a strange satisfaction. "But maybe it's worth checking again." Daniel's heart began to race. "Eleanor, what are you saying? I know what." Eleanor approached him and whispered. Daniel tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't obey. "Eleanor, we can't. We said last time was the last." "We did. But you've been thinking about it, haven't you?" Eleanor's hand landed on his shoulder. I really... Daniel tried to refuse, but the scent of her perfume was intoxicating. Memories came flooding back. "Just once, really for the last time," Eleanor whispered in his ear. Daniel's reason wavered again. "We can't. If Sophie finds out, Sophie is at work. She'll never know. Eleanor's touches grew more insistent. Daniel tried to resist one last time, but it was too late. Like the previous time, he gave in to temptation. Eleanor, this really is the last time. Yes, the last time for sure. But they both knew this wouldn't be the last time. Once again, they crossed the forbidden line and once again plunged into guilt. But this time, satisfaction was stronger than remorse. They had to admit that they were completely entangled. Dan, we're on a path with no return, Eleanor said in Daniel's arms. Yes, but I can't stop anymore, Daniel admitted honestly. A deep feeling had developed between them, going beyond mere physical attraction. A month passed. Daniel and Eleanor's meetings became frequent. The pretext of consulting for Sophie's sake lost its meaning. They couldn't go a day without each other. Daniel came almost every day after work, at lunch, sometimes even late at night. They were falling in love. Eleanor, Daniel said one day, his voice full of tenderness. Dan? Eleanor's gaze had also changed. These were the feelings of a man and a woman, not a son-in-law and mother-in-law. Something's wrong with me. If I don't see you for a day, I go crazy, Daniel whispered as he held her. Me too. Is this love? Eleanor was confused by the emotions flooding her after so many years. But their sweet time together was interrupted by an unexpected witness. One day, Eleanor was shopping at the supermarket when someone called out from behind her. Eleanor, is that really you? Turning around, she saw her former colleague, Brian Thompson. Brian, 55 years old, had been widowed 2 years ago and lived alone. Brian, what a surprise, Eleanor responded warmly. I moved to this neighborhood. What luck to run into you here. There was a particular interest in Brian's eyes. He had long harbored feelings for Eleanor. Now we're neighbors. I'm so glad to see you, Eleanor. Maybe we could have coffee if you have time. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, but there was no reason to refuse. Sure, I'd love to. At the cafe, Brian got straight to the point. Eleanor, isn't it hard living alone? I'm used to it. I lost my wife 2 years ago, and it's very lonely. How about you? Brian's words carried a deeper meaning. Sometimes it's lonely, honestly, Eleanor replied. But now that she had Daniel, she didn't feel lonely at all. Would you like to spend some time together? Brian finally revealed his intentions. Brian, I'm not ready for marriage, but we could be neighbors and stay in touch. Eleanor was taken aback. The proposal was unexpected. I understand this is sudden. Think about it. No rush. That evening, Eleanor told Daniel about it. Someone proposed to you? Daniel's face twisted. Not marriage exactly. He just suggested we be together. Absolutely not, Daniel reacted sharply. Jealousy flared within him, surprising even himself. Eleanor, don't you dare agree. Dan, calm down. I'll refuse. Of course you should refuse. I can't give you to another man. Daniel's confession stunned Eleanor. Dan, I really do love you, Eleanor, Daniel said, gripping her hands tightly. I don't need any more excuses about Sophie. I thought it was just passion at first, but now I'm sure. I can't live without you. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes. Me too. I love you too, Dan. They embraced. No more hiding, no more excuses. They had affirmed their love. But Brian didn't give up. A few days later, he was waiting for Eleanor at her building entrance. Eleanor, have you thought about my proposal? I'm sorry, Brian, but I'm not ready right now. No rush, I can wait, Brian said, holding out a bouquet of flowers. I found a nice restaurant for the weekend. Would you like to go? Before Eleanor could answer, the building door opened and Daniel stepped out. Oh, hello? Daniel greeted him, eyeing Brian. Brian looked surprised at the young man. Hello, I'm a former colleague of Eleanor's. And you are? I'm Daniel, Eleanor's son-in-law. Daniel replied politely, but inside he was seething. This man had brought flowers to his woman. The son-in-law. Nice to meet you. Brian nodded, but Daniel's response was cold. Eleanor, I'll wait for your answer, Brian said and left. When he was gone, Daniel asked, What does that man want from you? Calm down, Dan. I already said I'd refuse. But if he keeps coming around, he might find out about us. Daniel's concerns were justified. Brian could jeopardize their secret. What do we do? Eleanor worried. Refuse him firmly and… Daniel looked her in the eyes. I will never give you up. I won't let anyone else have you. Daniel's determination made Eleanor's heart flutter, but along with it, anxiety grew. How would this tangled situation end? Brian didn't intend to back down. Even after being refused, he continued to hover around Eleanor, waiting for an opportunity. And soon, he began to notice odd things. A young man's car was often parked outside Eleanor's building. When he learned it was her son-in-law, Brian's suspicions grew stronger. One afternoon, passing by Eleanor's house, Brian witnessed a decisive scene. At the building entrance, Daniel and Eleanor were embracing. And it wasn't just a relative's greeting, it was a deep hug between lovers. Brian's face contorted. What is this? A son-in-law and his mother-in-law? It was unbelievable, but he had seen it with his own eyes. That evening, Brian called Eleanor. Eleanor, can we meet? I need to talk to you about something important. Eleanor sensed trouble from Brian's tone. What about? This isn't a phone conversation. We need to meet in person. The next day, tension hung in the air at the cafe. Brian spoke first. Eleanor, I saw you yesterday. What did you see? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer from his eyes. You were with your son-in-law, and you were behaving in a certain way. Eleanor's face went pale. Brian, I'm not stupid. I saw everything. Anger crept into Brian's voice. So that's why you refused me? Because you're having an affair with your own daughter's husband? Eleanor had no response. Brian, what are you imagining? Sleeping with your daughter's husband. Brian's voice rose. People began to turn and look. Please keep your voice down, Eleanor pleaded. Keep it down? You're doing something so disgraceful and telling me to keep it down? Have you thought about what will happen to your daughter if she finds out? Brian's words cut like a knife. Eleanor, are you going to end this, or should I tell your daughter myself? No, Eleanor cried out, tears streaming down her face. Then what are you going to do? Brian asked coldly. Eleanor couldn't answer. That night, she told Daniel everything. He saw us. Daniel went pale. What are we going to do, Dan? Eleanor wept. If he tells Sophie, Daniel realized the gravity of the situation. Everything could collapse. Eleanor, we need to end this. Tears streamed even more from Eleanor's eyes. Do we have to? There's no other choice. We have to protect Sophie. At that moment, they both understood. Their beautiful time together was coming to an end. A week later, Daniel and Eleanor met one last time. Sitting in Eleanor's apartment, they looked at each other with unspeakable sorrow. Is this really the end? Eleanor asked in a trembling voice. It has to be. We both know that. Daniel's heart was breaking, but he had to accept reality. With Brian's threat, they couldn't continue. But I love you, Eleanor. And I love you, Dan. They embraced for the last time. Time seemed to stand still. Make Sophie happy, Eleanor said, stroking Daniel's back. And you find someone good. But they both knew. They would never be able to love anyone else. After that day, Daniel stopped visiting Eleanor. Sophia noticed the change in her husband positively. Dan, you've stopped going to Mom's. You used to go so often. Yeah, I don't want to bother her. Daniel forced a smile, but in his heart, he longed for Eleanor. He fell asleep with thoughts of her and woke up with her name on his mind. Eleanor felt the same. In her loneliness, her yearning for Daniel only grew. Brian no longer called her. Perhaps he was convinced it was over, or perhaps he was simply disappointed. A month passed, then 2. The situation didn't change. Daniel became even more caring and cautious with Sophia. It was partly guilt and partly an attempt to redirect his longing for Eleanor. Sophia was pleased with the change. Honey, you've changed so much. You're so gentle now. Daniel smiled back, but behind the smile was deep pain. One day, Sophia suggested, Dan, let's go see Mom together this weekend. We haven't been in so long. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The thought of seeing Eleanor filled him with both longing and fear. Okay, let's go. That weekend, they went to Eleanor's. When Eleanor opened the door and their eyes met, the world seemed to stand still, but they pretended nothing was wrong. Come in, you two, Eleanor greeted them with practiced restraint. Hello, Eleanor, Daniel said politely, but his voice wavered. Over dinner, they made awkward conversation. Sophia didn't notice the tension between them, but for Daniel and Eleanor, it was excruciating. On the way home, Daniel remembered Eleanor's farewell gaze. Love and longing still lingered in her eyes. 6 months passed. Daniel and Sophia's relationship stabilized, but in a corner of Daniel's heart, Eleanor still lived. Eleanor, too, spent her nights alone, remembering Daniel and crying. One day returning from work, Daniel accidentally ran into Eleanor. She was coming out of the supermarket with shopping bags, still beautiful. Their eyes met, but they didn't say a word. They simply stood for a moment, looking at each other, then each went their own way. But in that brief moment, they understood everything. Their love hadn't disappeared, and the reality in which this love could never be fulfilled remained unchanged. Daniel went home to have dinner with Sophia, but his thoughts were all of Eleanor. Eleanor, in her empty apartment, also longed for him. Their romance had ended, but it wasn't over. Deep in their hearts, the flame still burned.